They were seeing water for the first time after about 3 months. And they were wondering if it was because the Minister of State was coming by water.
Because the water can look. The water, there's a dedicated line from home to that. So if they want to put water, they can put water in here.
Somehow when the water get up there, Dr. Chang, it is not channeled to down here.
That means so that
there are areas that have lines to catchment areas, but this area is not linked to the catchment area.
No, there is water, there's pipe all around here.
This area is pipe?
Yeah, there are people here who have it, but they don't see any water at all for months.
We were the coast.
Pipes come every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks we have bills.
If the rain no fall, the water can rain fall.
How long it work?
It works sometime.
No, but how long did it work when it turned down?
Well, I didn't get any complaints then. I've been getting complaints certainly for the last year. And most of the water that people get around here has been trucked. Most times by me.
Okay.
You have a dedicated system for that. They are dedicated.
I want to know when, if you win this election, if we have a irrigation water road, that's so far.
Well, we can definitely tell you.
We can tell you what will have to come out here. Because the supply is out there.
The supply is all the supply is road. Everybody don't take care of farming. Only we don't take care of farming.
Look,
we have districts like Little Park across the road from all of that area. This is the most productive farming area in Jamaica. Look across there. Look across there. No water.
So what I want to be clear is that in this area you have catchment close to it and water source close to it.
You have wells.
Several wells, they're good quality wells. The line along the road is used for irrigation and domestic supply.
Yes.
A dedicated line was put in the reservoir on top Flaggaman to supply the water. It's not working for the last 6 years.
So we have to find out why the water here.
Mean that we can expand that to provide irrigation water, but the wells are quite productive.
Well, what we will say to you is that obviously
but we need to get this water running.
Provision for water here. You have lines and you have storage and catchment in close proximity. Why it is not working, I think, Horace, we have to ask some questions on
There's
that.
no reason why that.
No, but that alone can't help you, brother.
There are still
We need water to come from irrigation. Pipe water, not pipe to come once a week. That can irrigation water once a week.
The issue he is raised
No, the issue is raised.
That water is irrigation water.
What he's saying is that you need this area is so productive.
No, we understand that.
What the area needs is irrigation water. And I want to tell you something. If you have the irrigation water, the domestic water will be solved.
So is there irrigation water near this area? Well, then it's a matter of, Horace, we have to just bring this up. In fact, I think we should really call for that, seeing that this is, as you've said, the most productive agriculture. So that to me seems to be justification for
irrigation wells.
Alright, when I hear your complaint, I have a better understanding. And that's what my tour is about. My tour is about coming into the areas, figuring out what is the issue and how I can help to facilitate.
Last night, we couldn't get no water.
So you have two issues. Potable water, which is your and you have the big issue of trying to get irrigation. And you said there is a source of irrigation.
That's why I get it.
It is definitely on agriculture. But if you dig deeper, it's the loss of income and it's the loss of production. What we have seen so far is definitely farmers have lost their crops. That will have an impact on back to school. That will have an impact on the supply of food. We're in an area that is noted for its agricultural production. it will take some time for them to recover. So there needs to be an intervention very quickly on the part of the government for these farmers who have lost their crops, lost their investment. I have not seen or heard from the government any significant program of intervention. And I've heard the Ministry of Agriculture saying that there probably will not be any effect on the supply of food. I'm doubtful of that. It seems to me that there will be significant effects on food supply and, more importantly, on the price of food. Because what I'm seeing here is all the stops that I've made is not just a partial loss in agricultural output, it's a total loss. A loss from the drought itself, but a loss due to fire as well. So the drought is having a significant impact.
So how would you characterize some of the personal stories that you have been telling?
One thing is clear, the Jamaican people are resilient. They're not laying down arms and saying, that's it. It's sad, it's heart-wrenching, but I am always heartened by the resilience of the Jamaican people. They are willing to go again. They are asking for assistance to go again. They want to go again. And I think the government can help in providing very, very quick remedy and subsidy to get these farmers back.
What would be the mechanism for providing them with that assistance?
Well, firstly, I don't think it is beyond the capacity of the Ministry of Agriculture to provide the actual inputs, the seeds, the fertilizer, the pesticides, and all the inputs needed. I think that would help. As it relates to back to school, I think there are going to be some real cases of need that could be investigated for their truthfulness and the assistance provided.
In respect of those farmers who have suffered the consequences of their own folly, in respect of slash and burn, as it is called, how do you treat with that? Yes, they need assistance, but how do they get that message?
Well, there are two issues at play. So yes, it's their folly, but natural justice requires that you ensure that even if somebody did something which, as you call it, is your own fault, that they're not punished for it. I don't think it would be fair to say, well, you burnt down your own field and therefore you bear the consequences.
They also burnt on your neighbors' field.
I think you treat with that problem through education. You treat with that problem by your outreach officers, your field officers, and using this as an example to reinforce the folly of the practice. But at the same time, you want the production of the farmer, so you can't cut off your nose to spite your face. It is a situation where you have to be discerning. So you have to help the farmer, and you use this as a means of educating the farmer to the folly of the practice.
But having gone through this experience, this learning experience, and having done the extension services and having educated them, then what happens thereafter? What if next year there's a repeat?
Yeah.
What of the legislative process?
Yes,
now?
and I would agree with you that there could be. I don't want to give you a definitive answer on the practicalness of putting in place legislation for slash and burn. But I think that there is need, I agree with you, for regulating the practice. I think there is need. But I would more want to come down on the side of educating the farmers. I believe that the practice has certainly not been as popular as it was in the early days of agriculture in Jamaica. It's not something that all farmers use. And I think greater emphasis on education would be far more effective and use less resources in terms of getting compliance than to put in place legislation. I think let's spend some more time educating our farmers.
Right, I'll come back to the question of the farming and the water in a moment, but since we're on fire, let me take you to the top of the Malvern Hills where you have 3 educational institutions, boarding schools, Monroe, Hampton, Bethlehem, which are particularly vulnerable in the event of a major fire at any one of these boarding houses in the dead of the night. How does the state respond appropriately to that? Ought there not to be consideration given now to the establishment of a fire station in Malvern Hills?
Well, you've raised a prospect which should be experienced a bit more for our listeners. You're saying that there are 3 educational institutions which are in the main boarding institutions, which are far away from the nearest fire station. should there be any major fire or disaster, the response time could be so long that you could have serious injury or even loss of life as a result of any disaster. In addition to that, the buildings that form those schools are historical buildings. Some of those schools are over 100 years old and ought to be protected. So I could understand your position, and it's a position I share, that by virtue of the schools being where they are, in a remote rural area, and the nature of the assets that make up the school, that there should be special provision, probably a sub-fire unit being placed in close proximity to those schools so that the response time in case of any emergency could be short. Yes, I do agree with that position, and it is something that we will take into serious consideration and lobby for. The council for the area where some of those schools are located is here. You could probably
No, this is the caretaker. I am on the fence.
No, introduce yourself.
I'm Donald Simpson now.
And you're quite familiar with that particular issue.
Yes, having served as council I'm quite aware.
Do you think there's space in the Malvern Square in the vicinity of the police station, for example, to establish a small fire station?
Yes, there is space because across the road from the post office, property there is actually a parish council. So which have certain results
Well, I take it up to the former mayor as part of the parish council today, and I just wonder whether this is not something that needs to be pursued at the level of the parish council, at least as a discussion point at the local level.
Yeah, certainly, it would be something that could be pursued at the discussion. And I guarantee you that I will take it.
Let me get back to this question of water, adequate water for the farmers in this area. I heard the discussion and the various points of view that were being raised. There is the issue of, first of all, that which is perhaps available now but is not being properly utilized. Dr. Chan, explain that for me.
To my certain knowledge, dedicated land was taken to the Flaggaman Reservoir, top Flaggaman Reservoir, which is designed to provide water to this area on a 7-day-a-week, 24/7 basis. That's apparently not been done. That's been done for about a year. We need to find out why this is so and why it should, and have it restored. Because there's enough water in the wells out in the plains in Hounslow and that can provide water for the area. In addition, we should examine the feasibility of bringing in irrigation water from those wells. I am aware the aquifers incentives will have adequate water supply, and what it means is the investment to bring water to these people, and we have been playing around it for years. We started the process to do this, and I think we're calling the government to ensure that the program is completed.
This process of bringing irrigation water to the farmers here, it seems to have taken forever for the appropriate decision to be made. Is there a technical problem, or it's just purely a financial problem?
It's purely a political will. Make a decision and implement it. The financing for here would not be particularly difficult because the distance is not very far. I'm sure it's one of the things you should prioritize within the fiscal space you have. We are fully aware as a party that the government has limited fiscal space, but we should qualify that. We are spending $99 billion Jamaican per year on capital projects. It should not be too difficult to prioritize some water supply for South Central Island, which is one of the most productive areas in Jamaica. And you are guaranteed a good rate of return on that investment.
So then, Mr. Holness, should we expect to see further irrigation of the Peter Plains in the manifesto of the JLP for the next elections?
Well, it's generally already in our manifesto, but specifically, yes. And I tell you why. If you consider where Jamaica is in terms of its economic development, the question so far is whether or not the government can maintain fiscal discipline to lay that take-off wicket, if you want to call it that runway for growth. And that's one area of growth. The second area of growth is whether or not government is going to make the investment in infrastructure to facilitate growth. So if you take this area as being said, this is one of the most productive agricultural areas in Jamaica. But water is a major problem that is preventing the takeoff of the area in terms of it realizing its full potential for agriculture. Then one of the things that the government would have to do is to specifically look at the area and figure out what are the infrastructure needs that are creating the constraints around growth. Water is one of them. In the present drought situation, the question is, where is the water? There is no water. I would want to think of it differently. It is not that there isn't any water. It is just that the water isn't where the needs are. So it is really an infrastructure problem and not so much a water shortage problem. And had we appropriately designed infrastructure to facilitate growth, then even if we had a drought, you would be able to properly rationalize the use of your water, bringing it from areas where you have it in excess to the areas where you don't have it. And that means that you need to be building more reservoirs, more piping in terms of your pipeline network, and digging more wells. That is not being done, and not only it is not being done, it is not being done in a strategic way. So if you decide to put in infrastructure, then you would prioritize your areas of production first. So this area should have appropriate water supply. What we have heard from the discussion so far is that there are supplies in proximity, but we have just not moved the water from where it is to where it is needed. So yes, my answer to you is yes. That is the essence of the Jamaica Labour Party's position, that we must go for growth. It is not just a catchphrase. We're not just saying that. We're talking about some specific things that we need to do to get to growth.
Thus far, the talk has mainly been about the wells in the area. Mr. Hutchinson would have a long history of knowledge about, for example, the Black River. Why are we not talking about the possibility of exploiting the abundance of water in the Black River?
Well, you're making the point that it is not the shortage of water. It's not that there is a drought. It is really the lack of foresight in planning the infrastructure of the country such that we can use the resources that we have, such as water, to support a growth agenda such as growth in agriculture.
I mean, you don't have to go as far as the Black River in this area. The aquifers in South Central have more an abundance of water. We are going to visit Hope. This is one example of what we did. It's in the middle of a dry area, but it's a supply of nearly 1 million gallons per day, which we did a couple years ago, which is bringing relief to a wide area in that particular area of Peter Place. And we just need to put in, as indicated, infrastructure that is required to bring water here. The water is here in the south. We need to put in infrastructure, and it can provide both domestic and irrigation water. Improve the production and the quality of life for people down here.
And would that...
Mr. Hutchinson, as a man who have seen the Black River passing his yard,
yes.
That's where you want to go.
Yeah, and we are here in the southern half of the parish. But what about the northern side? Does the northern side have enough water, or would you benefit as well from the Black River if it's properly exploited?
Yeah, what happened is that I think it was in the 70s, that there was a channel that was being constructed from the Black River coming straight across the mountainside, which would then irrigate the south. There was a Dutch company that actually started the whole construction, and for somehow it just fell apart. We don't know what took place, but it had just ceased. But that project was to carry the water from the Black River coming through mountainside, and then it would have been in there too, because you know the Black River is there all the time, and it is just one where would have been doing extremely well for the south, for the irrigation.
What is clear is that this parish relies heavily on agriculture. It's a parish that I'm very familiar with. I have roots here. The people here are very industrious, but they are also very innovative. It is not a parish known for its extensive water resources, so the farmers here have had to adapt and create their own technology to enhance their agriculture. But this drought is so bad that even the mulching doesn't work. I've looked in the fields, I've squeezed the mulch to see if there is even any moisture. It's all gone. And so there is a crisis, and I think that the Ministry of Agriculture in their response has tried to play down the crisis. There is a lag time for the consumer to see the effect of the crisis. But if you, any tour, any just cursory look at the situation, will see that a significant capacity of the agricultural production in this parish has been devastated by the drought. There is a view that, well, it's an act of God, it's the environment, and we simply don't have water. Who can you blame? Well, I'm not here to cast blame, but I'm saying that the citizens of the country need to start to examine these situations, not just from a political perspective, but from a long-term developmental perspective. We will always face incidents of drought. That's just a natural part of the environmental cycle. The question is, how do governments mobilize their resources to mitigate against the effect of drought? And that means proper planning, that means building infrastructure, that means looking into the future to see what are the areas of greatest need and how do you provide for them. This area is one in which Jamaica will have to rely on, not just now but in the future, for the production of our food supply.
Would you though also urge caution against runaway importation?
Absolutely, and which is why, if it is, so let's back up a little bit to explain what you have just said. The argument for devaluation of the dollar is that it will make foreign goods more expensive and Jamaican goods more affordable relative to the expensive foreign goods. However, if you have a drought and you can't get the local goods, that means you will have to buy more expensive foreign goods that have to be purchased with a higher cost US dollar. So the strategy of devaluation in itself is insufficient to spark growth unless the government is at the same time heavily investing in building the capacity of your local production to actually give you the goods and services to substitute for the foreign imports. And this is what the Jamaica Labour Party has been saying, that the government cannot carry out the growth agenda on one leg. The second leg has to be your actual investment in building the capacity, and water and the provision of it in a sustainable and dependable way is one strategy to spur growth.
But specifically in respect of this issue,
yes.
While you may say that there isn't enough local production at the moment in light of the drought and the fires, etc., is it that you are going to be closely monitoring the issuing of import licenses for produce?
Yeah, and it has to be, and of course, but we have to be strategic in what we do. If there are areas where we need these crops, then you could hardly complain. But you don't want people to use the window of opportunity to create any long-term giving out of licenses. So if licenses have to be given out, it would have to be just within a short period as farmers are able to recover. And you would have to use a discretion as well. Do we really need it? Could the production be resuscitated in a matter of weeks or months? Then you may not need to issue. So all these things will have to be done with what I call ministerial discretion. Good governance would ultimately.
This area is a matter of weeks.
Yeah. Final comment, your own thoughts on how this might affect the country's growth projections?
It will have if it is that this part of Jamaica, centralism, accounts for almost 40% of the agricultural output of the country, then it is just common sense that it will have a negative impact. As I said, there will be a lag, but you will see it in the quarters to come.